everybody. Hello. It's nice to see so many people in person. It's nice to be back at Hong Kong FinTech Week. So for those of you who have been listening since the morning, I'm sure you've heard CBDC being mentioned a couple of times over and over. So over 100 central banks are at different phases of investigating central bank digital currencies. And needless to say, I think if it isn't obvious by now, central bank digital currencies have the potential of transforming the financial ecosystem. Central bank digital currency in general can be distinguished broadly between retail and wholesale systems. Today we're going to talk about retail systems. Wholesale systems are largely made for interbank payments, whereas retail CBDC systems are made for people like you and I, doing everyday transactions. With me today, I have two strategic leaders and thinkers, but most importantly, doers in this space. Mr. Yoav Soffer, CBDC lead at the Central Bank of Israel, and Nelson Chow, Chief FinTech Facilitation Officer at the HKMA. Let's welcome them again with another warm round of applause, please. Great. Thank you guys for being here very much. I think we should probably open this and predicate it on the fact that neither the Bank of Israel nor the HKMA have decided to launch a retail CBDC for now, but we'll hear a little bit today about the work that you've been doing to prepare for this potential outcome. So maybe Yoav, as our visitor, maybe we can start with you and you can tell us a little bit about the domestic context in Israel and the motivation and the case for retail CBDC.
Sure, happy to. Let me first just say really I want to thank both the HKMA and the BIS Innovation Hub for inviting me to this amazing event, and really happy to be here. So, you know, Israel, I guess like Hong Kong and many other countries, has a pretty well-developed payment system. And indeed, the question of do we need and why do we need the CBDC is not a straightforward one. First of all, you want to think of the fact that as the technology is evolving, central bank money is actually losing its technological advancement as opposed to commercial bank money. There are less and less things that we are able to do these days with cash as our economy moves to become more and more digital. Therefore, all central banks need to kind of ask themselves, do we need to also take our kind of basic product, which is cash, and move it towards the digital era, sort of, meaning supplying it to the public digitally. Within that, we at the Bank of Israel have mapped actually 6 possible motivations for why we may want to issue digital currency in the future. I'll name them briefly and maybe describe them along the conversation. So the 6 are, first of all, competition, innovation, resilience of the payment system, cross-border payments, privacy, maintaining the ability to pay with privacy, and reduce the use of cash and fight the illicit economy. Actually, we have done a set of technological experiments and POCs at the work that we've been doing at the Bank of Israel, and they have covered most of them. So for example, in our initial POC that we did, actually it was back last year, we set up an Ethereum kind of test environment where we launched CBDC tokens and kind of played with them, learned the technology. We kind of tried to test what it actually means to issue, mint, and pay with a token. And we also created a system where we could actually kind of bring the potential of DVP payments pretty much to every household. So you could think of a situation, for example, where you have a digital, any asset that can be represented digitally. For example, like the ownership of a car. And you can do a smart contract so that if you're selling me your used car and I'm paying you with digital money, so we can create a smart contract that the money will only move to you once the ownership of the car moves to myself. So we kind of played with this and learned of some policy consequences from this technology. Another thing that we did within the first stage of our POC is that we looked into privacy. You know, if you think about it, these days we have 2 very distinct alternatives. We have cash, which is completely anonymous, where if I will go and buy something at the shop, no one knows who bought, what did they buy, for how much did they buy, and etc. Not even the other side of the transaction, they don't even know who I am. As opposed to that, we have commercial bank money, which is something where, you know, if I buy with my credit card company and my bank, they know everything about my transaction. In CBDC, we actually have the opportunity to maybe rethink this and maybe design this something in a different manner. So we actually tested the technology that allows the policymaker to create kind of a periodical budget for private digital money. So each jurisdiction could decide, for example, that maybe we want to allow our citizens to pay in a specific month up to $100 or $200 that you can make digital, completely anonymous transactions, and then transactions are technologically completely anonymous. So we also played with this, and what we are seeing that through testing the technology, we're also thinking of all sorts of policy questions. I can talk down about them a bit more as we proceed with the conversation.
Okay, great, thank you. Maybe Nelson, same question to you. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the context for a retail CBDC in Hong Kong, another economy that has a very advanced payment system. So maybe you can motivate the topic and give a little bit of a background on the work that you guys have been doing.
Sure. I think if you look at around the world, most of the central banks have researched in CBDC in both the wholesale and retail level. And actually, if you look at the BIS survey, most of the central banks actually look into retail. I think there are a lot of reasons. I think Cecilia this morning have mentioned about the central bank's unique role and the trust that it can bring into the system. So that's why in Hong Kong, we also look into the retail space, despite the more advanced payment system that is already here. I recently just changed my phone, and I realized that I have so many different payment apps. And I can find at least 9 of them. I believe there are actually more of them. There are NFC-based and also QR code-based. So I believe you can, it's a highly competitive market. And someone may ask why we still need to study our CBDC. I believe the reason some of them Yoav have already mentioned. I think as a central bank, we have to support not just increase the competition within the market. This competition will drive innovation. That's almost true for every market. But also, I think we need to play our role as a central bank. In the old days, cash has been introduced, right, for the reason of ensuring the transfer of value in a trusted manner and in the physical world. But now we know that the world is moving more from physical to virtual. And our role is the same. I think in the virtual world, we also need to play our role to ensure trust within the systems, to ensure transfer of value in a safe and secure manner. And we also want to drive innovation. I think in the morning you heard of a lot of the talk about the metaverse, the Web3, NFT, all of that, DeFi. I guess this is the reason why even in Hong Kong we have a relatively vibrant payment system. We still want to move into studying our CBDC.
Okay, great, thank you. So maybe Nelson, this one's for you. So the Bank for International Settlement Innovation Hub in Hong Kong just published a project report called Project Aurum, which was of course based on the e-Hong Kong dollar and the technical implementation. So there were 2 models that were compared there. It's a 2-tier retail CBDC model, and in one of the 2-tier models, it was a CBDC that was intermediated by the banks, and then the second model, it was a stable coin that was issued that was backed by a wholesale CBDC. It's actually a very unique context for Hong Kong with note issuing banks. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that project and what some of the learnings were from that.
Yeah, sure. I think we have started to study CBDC since 2017, our project Line Rock. But at that time, we focused more on the wholesale space. So at that time, we worked with the 3 note issuing banks plus the clearing house in Hong Kong. And afterwards, we also, after certain level of maturity, we believe that we have the resources to move in the retail space. And at that time, we also follow very closely the BIS publications about the 3 models of retail CBDCs. And at that time, a number of pain points or actually requirements for issuing CBDC, our CBDCs have been listed. And to achieve all of them is not easy, right? You mentioned about anonymity, and some also mentioned about anonymous but traceable to a certain extent to avoid money laundering, and other issues like privacy and security, because when it goes to the retail wallet, you must ensure that the value of the holder of the wallets will not be attacked or stolen from the criminals. So at that time, we have a colleague who is an expert in cryptography. We think about, can we use our existing Hong Kong model? Hong Kong is very different. We have the note issuing banks issuing notes. And at the same time, we have the government issued coins and notes. So we have actually two systems. We want to mirror that in the digital world, and that's why we have this project aurum. And of course, we have just published the paper, and you guys can take a look at the project aurum paper. You can also refer to the earlier on paper announced in October last year, which is the EHKD technical perspective paper. I think both of them will give pretty much good insights about our thinking of how our CBDC can be launched in a two-tier model. And also, this project, we put it under the BIS umbrella, so the source code is open to BIS members.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Okay, you hear that, BIS members? Wonderful. Thank you. So that's Project Aurum, and Yoav, maybe we can move on and we can talk a little bit about Project Cellar. In many ways, Project Cellar is an extension and builds on some of the learnings from Aurum. So Project Cellar is a joint project between the Bank of Israel and the HKMA, and it works on the same concept of a two-tier intermediated model, but introduces this notion of exposureless intermediation, and it also introduces a strong aspect of cybersecurity. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the motivations there, the visions for the project, and kind of what the goal of Project Cellar looks like.
Sure. Daniel, you actually mentioned the two kind of building stones of Project Cellar, but you actually forgot the most important one, which is, to me, really the collaboration. Just when we started the current phase of our CBDC project, it was clear to us that we need to learn from the experience of others and join forces with others. And I think the Bank of Israel couldn't have had a better partner than the HKMA under the umbrella of the BIS Innovation Hub to do some more explorations regarding our CBDC work. So once again, and Nelson, thank you and all of your colleagues for this really great collaboration. So I was mentioning actually two other motivations that we have in Israel for our CBDC, which are competition and resilience. So if you think about competition in the financial and the payment sector, one of the the boundaries to competition is entrance barriers, right? It is hard to get into the financial system because there are all sorts of requirements that we regulators impose on the participants in the financial and the payment system. Now, Project Cellar is actually looking at a somewhat kind of renewed concept where if you think about cash, that it is like disintermediated, right? If I want to pay you with cash, there is no one intermediating within the transaction. So we're trying to sort of imitate that into the digital phase where although the CBDC would be two-tier, so I would not have direct access to the central bank. I, the end user, would be accessing the CBDC via an intermediary. But maybe that intermediary cannot be a financial institution, but just be merely a technical provider. So you can think about the CBDC as a system that resides within the central bank, and the network is within the central bank. But I, the end user, need to onboard a technical infrastructure that will actually allow me to make use of that CBDC. And if that institution can be completely exposureless, meaning not touching the money at any point of the transaction or the minting or redemption of the CBDC, then maybe the regulatory requirements for that institution could be looser than those that we put these days on financial institutions, and therefore we could actually achieve more competition. And that actually raises the point of security, because if you're opening the space to more participants, you may be actually compromising security. And I think at that point it kind of raised the idea of maybe we could also look at cybersecurity, which is, I think, something that we in Israel are known for having somewhat expertise. And I, for myself, have none, but also in the Bank of Israel and in the technological sector in Israel, there's a lot of expertise regarding cybersecurity. So in Project Cellar, we'll be actually looking at kind of these two contradicting elements. How can we actually increase the participants and let more institutions provide the CBDC service while not compromising the cybersecurity, and what kind of cybersecurity checks can we put into the system in order to ensure its resilience?
Right. Very nice. So it's interesting, I guess, we have a two-tier retail model. In that two-tier retail model from Project Aurum, we have intermediated CBDC direct going from the central bank to the commercial banks to the end users. We have a stablecoin-backed CBDC as well. Then comes in Project Cellar, and we have exposureless second tier with an added layer of cybersecurity that again is kind of like a horizontal that cuts across all payment systems. So those learnings are going to be adaptable to many, many other projects. So we have a couple of,
Yeah, it took a while before I, truly understand the exposure-less model. And I think the great thing about the collaboration with the Bank of Israel is I think we all know that you guys are very strong in cybersecurity. And I think that's the reason why we want a cybersecured two-tier model, not just the wholesale level, but also the retail level.
You know what, Nelson? We're so good in cybersecurity that all the emails you're sending me are being blocked by my system, the firewall.
Because
that good that we are.
Because of the keywords?
I don't know why.
So since this amount of experimentation, I think since then the HKMA has done a public consultation and has also done a policy paper, right? So we're moving away from kind of technical feasibility and starting to understand maybe the contours of how something like this can roll out. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how was that public consultation accepted? What are some of the results? And what are some of the policy considerations that in a way have been motivated by a lot of this technical work?
Yeah, the HKMA took it very seriously because it's talking about Hong Kong dollar, Hong Kong dollar. So that's why we have published at least 3 papers. One is the technical paper last October. A recent one is earlier this year, and a more recent one is on the 20th of September. We published our policy stance. That policy paper, we summarized the feedbacks that we have received from the industry. And actually, to a little bit of my surprise, the feedback was overall very positive for us to introduce our CBDC. And I think I mentioned about the highly competitive market within Hong Kong. And I think the reason for introducing our CBDC or getting ourselves ready is an important element because it will take a couple of years before we can really truly implement it. First, the technical things that you have mentioned, we have make sure that it's safe and sound, it's robust and it's resilient. Another aspect is actually legal. We have to go through possible legislative change to ensure that this Hong Kong dollar is fit for purpose. And just about last year, I think you may have watched the Tokyo Olympics. In Hong Kong have the best results ever. We have 6 medals, and I think that inspired me that not just because there's one silver medalist is one of our colleagues' daughter. The more importantly is the interviews of them is how long they took to train to such a level that they can go to the Olympic finalists. I think for EHKD or for any CBDC, it's actually the same. You cannot just jump in and say, oh, tomorrow I issue a CBDC. It's no such thing. You have to get yourself ready and prepared, and you have to go through many cycles of testing, iterations of getting pilots. So that's why we have launched in the recent policy paper, we have 3 whales. The first whale is to figure out the legal and technical foundations. We have to lay that foundation. And the second whale, we have to go through iterations of pilots. So to ensure that there are sufficient use cases for us to justify the issuance of EHKD. And the third whale is actual implementations. We hope that whale 1 and 2 will equip us with sufficient maturity to go into whale 3 relatively quickly.
Nice. We'll come back to that rail 3 in a little bit. Thank you. So Yoav, maybe over to you. So I think one of the projects that actually the Bank of Israel is working on that was recently announced is a project called Icebreaker, and it's also a joint project, this time with Sweden's Riksbank and with Norway's Norges, 2 Nordic banks focusing on retail cross-border central bank digital currency. Can you maybe motivate that project a little bit? And maybe, so taking it out of the domestic context now, talking about use cases, this cross-border use case seems to be something that you're interested in.
So first of all, this is indeed one of our major motivations for looking into CBDC, making cross-border transactions cheaper, more efficient, and more customer friendly. We can also look at this also from the point of view as disintermediation. We were talking about disintermediation earlier in the concept of Project Cellar, but think about it this way. Let's assume I invite Nelson to come visit us in Israel as a return to my return.
That's a formal invitation.
That's a formal invitation, by the way. So Nelson may want to book his hotel, and he could use his credit card, and the transaction from his credit card to the hotel in Israel will probably go through at least 4 or 5 financial institutions, his credit card issuer, the hotel's merchant acquirer, and maybe at least 2 correspondents in the middle. However, I can actually tell Nelson, listen, when you're coming to Israel, I may actually have some Hong Kong dollars left in my pocket, and you come to Israel, we could exchange them, I'll give you shekels, you take my Hong Kong dollars, and etc. So this is actually something of a concept that we'll be looking into in Project Icebreaker. So in digital payments, it can never be completely disintermediated, because if I hold my CBDC and a store in Sweden holds their CBDC, so there would need to be an institution in the middle that would actually do the foreign exchange transaction. But what we're trying to do in Project Icebreaker is to create a retail, cross-border, immediate, and atomic transaction. So I would be, for example, paying with my digital shekels from my laptop in Israel, and IKEA in Sweden or whoever will be receiving their e-kronas at the other side of the transaction immediately in an atomic or nearly atomic, but a complete final transaction. We believe that that could really reduce the costs and the complexity of cross-border transactions for the end user, and mainly for, as we said, for at least initially, for retail purposes, like as I mentioned, for such as e-commerce and tourism. But maybe at the end of the day, as all of us are looking into innovations that CBDC could bring in the domestic landscape, such as we mentioned, DVP and metaverse and maybe micropayments and privacy payments and stuff like that. So imagine how cool it could actually be if I could do a DVP transaction with a counterparty in another transaction where I'm paying CBDC on the one hand and they're getting their CBDCs on the other hand, and the digital asset is moving maybe on the same platform or something like that. So we could actually combine the cross-border element with the innovation element of CBDCs. So this is what we're looking into in Icebreaker, and once again, a very important collaboration with the 2 central banks that have been in the field for a very long time, and also something very fascinating that we're doing. And we'll see, maybe other central banks may join this in the future.
Yeah, we are an observing member of Icebreaker, and hopefully sometimes later we can be a full member. And at that time, next time you come to Hong Kong, the next FinTech week, you can pay using your payment app.
That's a good goal. There's not a lot of ice in Hong Kong, but nevertheless, you can be a member of Icebreaker. Absolutely.
We may need to find a new name for that, right?
So when you think about retail payments in Hong Kong, do you see a cross-border angle to that as well? Do you think that that's something that...
Well, I think it depends on how much activities between the jurisdictions. Of course, well, we have a lot of Japanese travelers. Maybe they would like to see something like that, payment methods that they can use cross-border. But I think it's driven by activities, real economic activities. Yeah.
Right, real e-commerce and travel.
Absolutely. Although one thing that's nice about Project Icebreaker is that the way it's built is that there will be a hub in the middle of the CBDC systems, and then if that hub is global, so any CBDC system in the world could potentially connect to it, and then I would be able to transact with an institution in Hong Kong, regardless of the total trade volumes that there are between Israel and Hong Kong, because we're all just connected into the same hub. You can think about it in the way, like, look about, for example, about the telephone system. I can make a direct call from Israel to Hong Kong, not because someone had stretched a line from Israel to Hong Kong, because it's a global system that somehow is being constructed that we're all working on the same platform, under the same kind of standards, and I don't even need to know anything about the person I'm dialing in the other country except for their number. So if we can import that into CBDCs, so that I don't need to know anything about, think about how we're doing cross-border transactions today, all of these details that we have to put into the bank account and the IBAN number and all these things and the SWIFT code, and how many mistakes we can do in that. Imagine a situation where all I need to know is the phone number of the store that I want to pay in the other country, and I can pay with my CBDC, and they can get their CBDC in the other end of the transaction, and all of the systems connected to this global hub that actually makes sure that the standards are compatible from the CBDC system to the hub, and therefore to the other country's system.
Interesting. So if I took a step back and kind of reflected on the conversation, I think it's interesting. First of all, it's incredible to see the collaboration among central banks and to see that really, we're doing this all together to a large extent. It's also really interesting, I think, the different scopes of the different projects and how broad they are. And although maybe the distinctions are somewhat nuanced, we can see that there's clearly different scopes and we're evaluating very different use cases. Maybe because we have a couple of minutes, I can ask a curveball question. So I know that you guys spend a lot of time thinking and motivating these projects. I also find that most of the time people that work in this space are very intrinsically motivated and very passionate about this work. So could you maybe paint a picture of if you had more opportunity, if you have more resources, more time, what would you want to participate in? What types of other use cases do you think are on kind of the horizon of retail CBDC that you're looking forward to engaging with? Just ideas that you could put out there, and maybe they could be implemented by the HKMA or the Bank of Israel, or maybe there's other central banks at the BIS that are listening that might take on that opportunity.
Yeah, maybe I can come first. There are so many different CBDC projects happening in different regions. Yoav mentioned about the icebreaker, and other regions will have other projects. And in Hong Kong, we have the Bridge. I think there are synergies between all of them. Sometimes, although we are experimenting different models, but ultimately, I believe all these models will converge because if you remember this morning's Eddie's speech, more is more. So you cannot, build different regional platforms. Well, you can, but you cannot get benefits from a bigger system. So I hope that, with the drive from BIS Innovation Hub, a lot of these projects can, at certain point, can converge and benefit the different economies.
Great, thank you. Yoav, anything on your mind?
Yeah, I think, the way I see it, so if we go 100 years back, so central bank money was kind of a stupid technology, pieces of paper, pieces of metal. Commercial bank money was also not very advanced. It was written in books, maybe even manually. As years went by, so the money that we're holding in commercial banks has been utilized in technologies that have been advancing and advancing, and it is actually the case that today I can walk into a store in Hong Kong, I can tap my phone, and my bank account in Israel is being debited, okay? However, the central bank money remained in this ancient technology of paper and coins, which means that there are more and more things that we can do with central bank money. So we need to find ways to actually bring central bank money to the public in more advanced technologies, and maybe we can even do this leapfrog and do all of these things that are even more advanced that we can do with commercial bank money today. So for example, we mentioned the DVPs, maybe the micropayments, for example. Think of how cool it could be if we didn't have to buy a monthly subscription to a newspaper and we could just pay, I don't know, a half of a cent for one news article from one newspaper and a half of a cent for another news article from another newspaper, etc. And then maybe if the central banks actually push this technological frontier and actually bring to the end user, to the retail user, the more advanced technologies of money, it can also be the case that the financial sector will also realize that they need to advance as well and provide the customers with more opportunities than they have today.
Amazing. Okay, wonderful. So, I guess Eddie kind of opened the session by talking about radical innovation. I think you guys got a little taste of maybe where some of the thinking is in the central banking community and people that are driving the project. I always appreciate the opportunity to chat with you wonderful gentlemen. I learn a lot and it's always entertaining. I'm glad that you mentioned Bridge because tomorrow there's going to be a panel dedicated to Project Bridge. So if you're interested in cross-border payments in a wholesale context and maybe one of the most advanced projects in the world, I would definitely recommend tuning in for that. And I think that's all the time that we have for today. So thank you again very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. And see you next FinTech Week. Thank you.